All right, gentlemen, this morning we are going to do a brief review, pull it all together a little bit. By now, you should have read, and you are responsible for having read background studies by Fanton. Make sure you've read that. Next, lexical studies by Bach. After that, you should have read grammatical analysis by Johnston. And finally, Lowry's validation. Those are key reading for you. Let us review the big picture before we get back into the lecture, because we're running down to our last 3 weeks of class. If you remember, there are 3 steps to preaching: observation, interpretation, and application. In expository preaching, observation, interpretation, application. Do you remember that? We make a divide here. Application would be what they will teach you in sermon prep, also known as homiletics. This is where you illustrate and let the discovery of these 2 steps become pertinent, relevant, applicable to the people you will be teaching the Word from. So we will look at, and we have been looking at, these 2 steps: observation, interpretation. Now, let's go over here. The first step was observation. This is where you're beginning to examine your passage. You should be doing background study on your book. New Testament commentaries, New Testament introductions, Bible dictionaries. You're drawing up information about the book you're writing about or preaching about or passage by doing background study. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Remember those names of those that help. And if you ask those questions, who, what, when, where, why, how, you can do the work of what a commentary would do, what a commentator would do. You're asking these questions. You're doing background and you're observing. So you've got to read and become familiar with the Greek text. So that's why we've done Ephesians 3 times. 3 times is not going to give you enough familiarity of Ephesians, but we can only do so much. You're becoming familiar enough with the Greek text so that you could read it like the English. Now, familiarity better not breed contempt, because you want to start observing grammatically the lexical, grammatical, word order, the nuances of the passage, how things are said. You're looking at the inferential conjunctions, the logic of the writer. You're asking questions of the text to gather information. But remember, the observation step is preliminary. You're just starting. You also are doing the English text. And you should be reading multiple translations. the New American Standard, the New King James, the NIV, the English Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version. This helps you see how people are understanding the text. Remember, translations are interpretations. Now, we didn't have time to go into this too much, but remember, there are two philosophies of translation: formal, literal, versus dynamic. You want to be reading for understanding more literal translations. Literal translations, their philosophy is, let's try to stay as close to the Greek as we can. That's not always completely possible, but let's do it. Dynamics say, well, let's make the English sound really good. Well, the more you try to make the English sound really good, the more you have to interpret. So all translation involves interpretation. You can't get away from it. But the more you become wanting to be real smooth English, the more you'll interpret. So you want to get literal formal translations. You want to become familiar with it. See how they're translating in the English. And you're also coming up with a preliminary purpose statement. This is preliminary. Notice the repetition of the word preliminary. You're asking yourself in every paragraph, what in essence is this paragraph about? Now for class, you're going to have to write this stuff down. I know how busy preachers are. I am. People in the hospital. I got to go tonight. A gentleman's in the hospital, not doing well. And I know how busy you are, but you should be at least, when you're a busy pastor, thinking about these things. Now we have electronic devices where you can write a little quick note, get Siri going on your iPhone and tell it to, hey, record this. And then you play it back, because you'll never, if some thought comes to you on the freeway, can I suggest you have some way of somehow, because you won't remember it, even though sometimes I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think about something, and then I run down to my laptop and I'll write it. Just real quick, then I can't go back to sleep. But anyway, these are preliminary. You want a purpose statement. What's this paragraph? Now, that doesn't mean you have to always accept the paragraphs that the UBS or the Nestle Aland or your translation gives you. You don't always have to say, okay, but generally speaking, you go with the paragraphs there, and what is it about? What's it saying in one sentence, or maybe at the most two? And then you're asking yourself, what are the supporting points in that paragraph, A, B, you should have at least two, that the writer uses to support that preliminary statement. Okay? Now, validation, this article that you have to read, validation simply means you're asking, do my supporting points that I've discovered support my purpose statement? And does my purpose statement get supported by my supporting points? You'd be surprised that simple little procedure will help you stay in context. Why do we do this? This helps you stay in context. I'll give you an example. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:14, eye has not seen nor ear has heard what God has in mind for those who love him. And there are people that will stop right there. But if you go to the next verse, it says God has revealed those to us. So you don't want to keep things in isolation. This is why you've always got to be working on your purpose statement, supporting points, but they're preliminary. And you're going through and you are observing the grammar. You're observing the lexical words used, the word order. You're observing how the nominatives are used. Remember that? The genitives, the datives, the accusatives. We don't go with the 8-case system here. We're 5-casers. Although after you get out of here, you're welcome to be an 8-case if you want. How are those constructions used? What kind of conditional clauses are used? Remember that? First, second, third, fourth. What inferential conjunctions? Are there contrasting synonyms? Paul will say in Galatians 1, these people have invented another gospel, which is not really another, but it's another. And you go, wow, in English, what do you... But in Greek, it means they are preaching a heterodox gospel, a gospel that is not the same that was historically preached by Christianity. And Paul says, watch out for that, because people that do that, let them be cursed. So you're watching for synonyms being contrasted, words being used, unusual word order. Remember what we did with husband of one wife. We solved that one, didn't we? But you're observing these things, but it's all preliminary. You're making little notes. You may find a resource. You may call up Jeremy in Kentucky and say, Jeremy, I'm preaching through this book. Do you recommend me a couple of good commentaries? Remember, the key is 2 or 3 essential commentaries. If you branch out to too many commentaries when you do use commentaries, it becomes too much. Start with 2 or 3 of the best. Call Jeremy. Call Steve. Call the doc. Call Tronway. Call somebody. Do you think? People have annotated bibliographies. Start reading your commentaries. Remember now, commentaries are a check. You should be doing your own work here. Okay? But nonetheless, you're observing, you're writing. Now, that's all preliminary. Then we have interpretation. This is where the intensity and the recording and the meditation starts really to come to formal expression. In the observation step, you're preliminary, but here, the interpretation is formal. There's great intensity. You're deciding. You're problem solving. You're concluding on the interpretation, and you're writing them down. So the difference between these 2 steps is this is preliminary. It's up here. You may have tidbits. Here, the formal expression. You're writing it all down. You're recording it. You're deciding. You've discovered the problems of the text. Remember, here you're discovering problems. Yes? Here you're deciding problems in the sense of conclusions. You've discovered the problems here. Here you're trying. Now listen, sometimes if the problems are so difficult, you may say, I don't know. But you're reaching some conclusions. You're writing it down. What are the essential arguments for your paper? You're going to give me the formal interpretation. What you're going to do for this paper, I'm going to assume you've done this. This is what you're going to write up. This is your final paper. Your final paper on lexical. Your final paper on grammatical commentary. So you've done one lexical. In theory, Every word should have been done like that one lexical, but I know I'm not going to get it. So you don't ignore lexical in the grammatical. You just don't do a whole huge 10-page one. So you're writing up your grammatical commentary. And you're saying, there is a problem with this construction. There is a problem with this construction. Some think that the meaning is A, and they argue for these essential reasons. Now notice how I'm doing this, and I better see this in your paper. You're discovering the problems. You're saying there is a problem with this construction. Some think A. Some think B. Here are the arguments that they use. Now, you can't cover every argument, and you want to put it in your own words, because if you can't summarize it well in your own words, you may not understand the problem. Some think that for this, and this reason, this is the way we should take it. Some others think for this reason and this reason. And then I want you to give me how you resolve. What are the arguments pro, con? How you resolve it in natural English. You don't have to make it scientific 1.1, 1.2. You just want to write it in normal, natural English. You're explaining this to people. You're going to reach a conclusion. Now listen to me. In homiletics, you don't necessarily identify every problem in your preaching. When you come to preaching, these problems should have been resolved. Your preaching may include one or two problems if it's really big and salient, but you don't necessarily carry these problems over to your homiletics section, to your application section. So you're resolving problems. You're giving the arguments. So you better start writing down because I want this documented. I want to know who takes this and what arguments. And you're footnoting, endnoting. I don't care about footnotes or endnotes. And then you're reaching a conclusion. You will not be necessarily graded on your conclusions as long as they're within the confines of the doctrinal statement. I'm not looking so much for your conclusion at times as the weight of your argument. How you argue. And resolve it. And you do this for every verse, for every problem, lexical, syntactical. You're showing me in your paper, you're observing word order and saying, I've noticed the word order here is first attributive, second attributive, and here is the significance of that. By the way, commentaries often will leave you just when you need them the most. Many great commentaries comment on the obvious and neglect the great problems that need resolution. They will leave you when you interrogate the text. So you have to do your own work too. You write this up. Now, in the notes, there is a handout that I've given you in the additional notes of 604, how you write up your research. And this handout has first the overall exegetical method. I've given you a handout that talks through the exegetical method. It's condensed notes on the principles and practice of exegesis. Please consult these notes that you're given. Read through all of these notes, and it condenses the exegetical method. The exegetical method, we had to cover a lot of material, so I condensed for you the steps. Major step 1 on pages 38 through 63, page 3 of the condensed notes on the exegetical method. Major step 2, pages 64 to 181 on page 4. Major step 3 on page 5 of our notes, pages 182 to 185, bringing it all together. And then on page 6, how to write up that exegetical paper. And that's what we want to discuss. How do you write up the results? And I want you to take and look at paper specifications right now in the handouts. On my additional notes, you have a chapter entitled Paper Specifications. This is talking about the commentary that you are writing on your 10 to 12 verses. Now, I know that the PDFs don't have the same pagination as do my notes when I wrote them up on Word. So they're page 45 of the PDF notes, page 1 and 2. It's called Paper Specifications, okay? Have you found it? Now, before we leave this, does everybody see what we're doing? The big picture here. Is there a question on the big picture of observation and then interpretation? Observation is preliminary. Interpretation is intensive, and you're writing it down. You're giving formal expression. You're resolving your discovery, the problems you've discovered, and you're resolving it. Justin.
Is the observation step supposed to be the whole book or the paragraph?
Well, in theory, it should be the whole book. In practice, for you, it's going to be especially your section. But listen to me. Remember what I told you in this paper, and this becomes very important, and you will be graded down if I don't see it. I want to know how your paragraph relates to the whole of Ephesians and how the whole of Ephesians relates to your paragraph. You better give me the argumentation that Paul uses leading up to your paragraph and after your paragraph to the end of the book. If your paragraphs, you chose the first verses of Ephesians, you better give me Paul's logic of how that flows afterwards. But I better see how your passage fits in with the whole of Ephesians and how the whole of Ephesians fits to your paragraph. How the part fits the whole and the whole fits the part. Justin, did that answer your question? Any other questions on this overview? Now remember, take advantage of my additional notes that I have written because they give the big picture. The difficulty in exegesis is so many times you get bogged down into the details, you can't see the big picture. The additional notes give you the big picture. Please be reviewing them for your project in seeing how to do this. I also have sample papers on the final result. And I may provide you with one. So that you can see an example of some of the ones that I've had done. And on that, you better have your controlling purpose statement, the supporting points, and tell me not only how your passage fits the whole of Ephesians and the whole of Ephesians your passage, but you better tell me the controlling purpose statement and the reasoning why you believe that controlling purpose statement is what you said it was. I want to see a lot of explanation. That doesn't include all the explanation of the problems, lexically and syntactically, observation. How long is this paper? What's the theory of how long it is? 25 pages. Good luck with that. The commentary we use as an example to you probably started out with 100 pages, and by the time it was done, it came to what? 600 and some pages when it's all over. Because true exegesis, if it's done well, if it's done thoroughly, is going to take time. So are you doing these things that we're talking about? Are you observing your passage? Have you come around to a preliminary purpose statement? To me, sermon prep takes time. And it's amazing for me, guys that can, the night before, after the Sunday school party that they attended till 11:30, and by the way, there's a lot of churches that will expect you to go to every party as the pastor. The more little churches there are, the more they expect you to be there. I have a small church of 100. I'm expected to be there for these things. People know that you love them by caring for their needs and being with them. Do not be an absent shepherd. So that means at midnight, the guys that at midnight, the night of the morning of their sermon, those that can cram and jam in that hour and come up with all the best observations and solve all of those issues, that's probably why they invented commentaries. It's all been done for me. It's going to be difficult. And I've tried to give you a method that you can adapt to your own purposes when you become a preacher, because every preacher will not, one size does not fit all in terms of sermon preparation. You'll adapt it to your own. That's okay. We all do. And you'll find that in the regular preaching, certain things work and for you, and some things you will have a little bit more difficult time with. So are we seeing this observation and interpretation? And if you take my PDF notes, those condensed notes that are provided for you give you that big picture that we're talking about right now. I expect you to have them read. Questions? By not asking questions, you're saying to me, you fully understand the observation and interpretation, you get the big picture, and now you're working on the details of putting that all together. Remember, you're explaining this passage with all of its problems and observations in a paper as if you were explaining this to a fellow seminary student as to what you've discovered. You don't take all of this over into your preaching, or you'll bore them to death. Doctors can talk medicalese to each other, but if you talk medicalese to do they teach you to tell your patients medicalese or what do they tell you to do, Doc? Okay. I know, because there's a medical shorthand for things and you understand it, but your patients don't. What happens then is doctors probably don't explain anything to their patients because they just don't want to have to break it down for them. I've noticed this. A lot of doctors will not explain much. And me, I'm always asking. I want to know. There are times in which I may not want to ask, though. So you're taking this detail is for you to explain the passage thoroughly to someone that would understand the grammaticalese language. But when you preach it, you don't take that over. You then take what you've understood and make it applicable and understandable to the congregation. Now listen, some of you may be pastors up at Berkeley, and you'll have all sorts of Berkeley professors and engineers, and they'll want to really get into the detail because they're prone that way. Some of you may have churches where the people are suburban, blue collar. Mine's a blue collar church. And I wouldn't dare get into some of the details with these precious people because of their level of understanding. That doesn't mean they're stupid. And so you've got to judge your audience. Always come in and say, what kind of an audience am I preaching to? And if you don't know, you're asked to speak somewhere, best thing to do, my opinion, would be to shoot for the middle. Not too high, not too low. Be a Goldilocks preacher. This soup is too hot. No, this soup is too cold. Oh, no, this is just right. This bed is too hard. No, this bed is too soft. Oh, no, it's just... So try to find the middle. Stephen, you had your hand up.
I did just a structural question of the paper. It appears from your instructions that there's a grammatical section and a commentary section? Or
No, you put them both together.
All together.
There should be no separation. You continuously, running flow narrative, talk about all the problems, all your observations. You should go verse by verse. But you do not separate. This is a running flow. We separate them somewhat here so that you can see what you need to do. But in your paper, you're just running flow narrative, all of them together. There's a lexical problem here. Talk about it. There's also in this verse a grammatical problem, and you want to smooth flow, running narrative, talk it through the whole passage.
So the parsing and declension is just as we go?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wow. I was picturing the spreadsheet of where you wanted everything.
You must have worked for FedEx. Why does that make me think that? The spreadsheet idea. I know. Listen to me. You're not shipping material to people in the pew. He's going to zip code everybody in the pew. And we send them. No, you want to. It's a running flow narrative, all together, continuous flow narrative, discussing the passage through, and try not to separate everything like that. Oh, by the way, I will ask one thing. Your chicken scratch sheets of maybe you've written down some observations. I may want to have you PDF that and put that as an attachment to your paper to see how you parsed everything, how you've got to give me in your paper the parsing and everything, okay? So I want to also see your chicken scratch of here is some of my preliminary workup. I don't care. It could be that only you could read it. But I want to see that you've been going through the process of chicken scratch, writing things down, observing the passage, meditating on the passage. Tronway? Don't make the paper chicken scratch, but include the chicken scratch paper. Yes.
Something you just said, actually, want to clarify. You want us to parse everything or just the things that are of exegetical significance? Like in the paper?
For your purposes, everything is of exegetical significance. See, if I said only of exegetical significance, that means you could parse one verb and say, that's all I felt was everything for you is significant in your passage.
Okay, so like the way we go through, this is a genitive, this is a nominative masculine singular.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Give me whatever you can. Give it to me. And here's the tension. You've got to give me the details, but keep the big picture. In keeping the big picture, you can't ignore the details. And in the details, you can't ignore the big picture. You've got to, part of a good evaluation on your paper is, can you keep the big picture and the details both interacting so that the person understands? Doc?
When we scan our observations, does that count towards the 25 pages?
No. That is,
25 pages is not a lot.
it's like this, Doc. That can subtract from your final grade for the paper, but it won't add anything. I just want to make sure that now if you want to Mickey Mouse me, you could write chicken scratch that night. Fake it. Please don't fake it. I'd rather have you just give me what's real. Okay? Just give me what's real. But that's in addition to your paper. Tronway?
So I just want to make sure I understand how the paper should be formatted, because you want it all in prose, but I see in the instructions you can put like verse references as a heading.
Here's what I do. I try to give the students certain directions the big picture of what I want. You have to go verse by verse. You have to parse everything, all the grammatical observations, all the problems lexically, grammatically, all your observations. And then I let you have some flexibility. There's a lot of professors that would obsessively, compulsively make it a formula. I want to see those things, but I'm going to give you some leeway in where you would put those things or how you want to express it in some senses. I want you to have freedom yet responsibility. Sounds like a theological tension, huh? You have freedom, responsibility. So I'm not a micromanager because every one of you, none of us think the same way. And thank God, God made us all different. So I've got to give you the big picture, what I want to see, without complete micromanaging you on that. Okay? Questions?
I think it'd be great to see the example you talked about.
You do. You want to see an example.
You mentioned an example paper earlier.
Well, could it be in another book of the Bible besides Ephesians?
Of course. Yeah.
Or would you rather have it in Ephesians and especially on your passage? I'll see what I can do. I'm here to help. Remember now, to be honest, if you imitate the way Honer has done things, that's the style, the genre of what you want to do, but I want you to have some freedom there too. So, okay, next week I will PDF a copy to you of one that I consider exemplary. No, and I don't want any maps. Listen to me, that's another thing. I don't care to see the maps of the journeys in Acts. There should be no maps, no color pictures of Paul, sitting at his desk writing Ephesians or something like that. This should be symbols that represents letters, that represent words that have meaning. No, use your left side of the brain, your logical side. I'm not looking for an artistic side. I've had guys that write papers, they'll have 3 pages of material of writing, and then they'll insert all of these beautiful pictures, and that's what we call filler. And I am aware of when you do those things. I know you think that I'm Mr. Magoo, and I am, but I am aware of those things. So please don't do that. Chris Williams.
Since we did the background paper and stuff, do we not have to have a section on historical context?
Well,
can we just jump into?
You may see some of that as applicable, but there's some. See, in the background paper, you've done a preliminary overall picture of Ephesians. There may be something that would come out in your passage that you've chosen that you would want to bring something specifically in there, but it may or may not. Paul may reference something historically in your section, and you may want to comment on it, but it may be just paranetic doctrinal in your section. You may not have to bring it out. So it just depends upon the passage you've chosen.
So it wouldn't be a separate section, it would just be something
No,
that would come
we
up
want
in
this,
your
guys.
section.
All of this final project, the crescendo, is continuous running flow narrative. Everything is together. You're explaining this passage to your fellow seminarian, and you're solving the problems on this. I don't want to see illustrations. That's for sermon prep. That's homiletics. Questions? These are all good questions. Nathan?
If we go over 25 pages?
Not a problem. That doesn't mean for quantity I will give you a better grade. But it does mean that, to be very honest with you, if you do this right, it is very difficult to confine it to within. If somebody said 25 pages is not, I don't know how you could do it. See, my method, in contrast to what is known as the digest method that had been pursued, mine is such that you need a lot of You need a lot of room to do this kind of thing. Okay, let's go now today to, and we've probably stated a lot of this today, but let's go to the additional notes. I think it was said to be page 45 of the additional notes, on the importance of recording your research. And this comes from Grassmick, pages 188 to 191. I don't know if I'll always use Grassmick, but the way you record results and will probably stay much the same no matter what grammatical work I use. Now, it's important, as we've been telling you, to record your results. That means write them down. You want to write down your grammatical and syntactical observations in a continuous running flow narrative. Why do we have you do that? Well, it organizes your work on the text. It gives a logical flow to what you've discovered. And memory is associative. So when you do a running flow narrative, that links problems together instead of in isolation. Again, that's why I didn't like the digest method. The problems were not linked together. They were isolated. Lexical over here, and then they isolate syntactical over. I don't think that's the logical way people think. Engineers think that way, but I don't think the average guy. Are there any engineers in here? Andre. And then if you write up this summary, when you do preach it, it's great to have a summary like you're about to do, because when you preach it, keep these notes. You may make out of this a candidating sermon. If you want to preach a New Testament passage, some of you may lean toward the Old Testament. But this may give you a passage that you can candidate with. The great thing about candidating is if they call you in for a week, you can preach that sermon. Then if you get a call from another church, you can do the same sermon. It's new to them, not new to you. And by the time, like me, you've done it the 150th time, you'll start to know that section of Scripture. That's what I did on candidating. Amazing, we spent, I don't know how much time in the airport candidating for churches, and you'd preach the same sermon in one state, and then if you're somewhere else, and sometimes if they call you in for more than one Sunday, then that's more difficult to do. But if they call you in for a preliminary, so you've got a candidating sermon. So we record it so that we can organize our work, aid in the memorization, and review it when you give the sermon on it. So here's what we want you to have. Once again, we've talked about this, but this page gives you this handout gives you the formal expression. Don't forget to give a synopsis of the argument of the book as a whole. Now, we've done that somewhat for you if you go with my outline. The call of the church, the conduct of the church. How does your passage fit within that argument of Ephesians? You want to give the worm's eye and the bird's eye view in that. You want to give the big picture as well as some of the details as you work that out. Next, you need to give me an exegetical outline of your passage, as well as the whole book. Especially for your passage, your exegetical outline is a result of your controlling purpose statement and your subpoints. So really what you're doing when you do the controlling purpose statement and your subpoints, you're making an exegetical outline. Okay? And it does not have to be onomatopoetic. There's a guy whom I know that's rhyming the New Testament. Well, sometimes it can't rhyme because if you try to rhyme everything, it may distort the theology for the sake of having words that rhyme. So I want an exegetical outline, and that's the same thing as your controlling purpose statement or preliminary subpoints. So work that into it. Grammatically, you give me in your continuous flow narrative the parsing, the declensional characteristics of every word. You identify the syntax of each component. You will also give me something that we haven't talked about. But you will also include, and it can be a separate section stapled with it or uploaded with it, because I want you to upload it to Joule. I want not the New American Standard Translation, not the New King James, not the English Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version. I want your translation of the passage based on your understanding of Greek and translation. Remember, translations have a lot going into them, and the editors of the New American Standard were not plenary verbally inspired in their English translation. How about that? That's what's so wrong about the King James idea that it's the only translation. It isn't the translation that is inspired. It is the original text as it was penned by the author. After that, translations are your best attempt at interpreting, translating one language into the next. So you have become, for your passage, the expert on those 12 verses. I want to know your translation. And if there's anything about your translation that you think is salient as to why you went one way or another, footnote in your translation. Maybe you took a word this way. Put a footnote. I took it this way because I think that the RSV, New King James, didn't quite understand this principle. You know, if you want to put that in. But I want to see your translation on that. And then, of course, you write your commentary, page 2 here. This is a verse-by-verse commentary, section by sentence, sentence by sentence, but you may want to relate one section to the other somehow. You can. This is an essay, not an outline. It's in prose. Both syntactical and lexical are incorporated, and you need to discover significant problems. Now, that's an interpretation. Significant is an evaluative judgment. Again, the reason why I went away from the digest method was it treated all problems as equally significant. Listen to me. Are you listening? Not all problems in the text are of equal value. Suppose that you interpreted every wave on the ocean as a tsunami. That would be very tiring, wouldn't it? Every time a wave rolled on shore, the alarms would be going off. Well, it's an evaluative judgment. Now, for you, I want to see more attention to problems, and I don't want you to ignore them. But let me tell you, not all problems deserve equal attention. You need to resolve especially the significant ones, but I better not see, if you don't have any problems in your passage, and you tell me that you didn't find any problems, there weren't any, you are not going to surmount the challenge of this assignment. So there's this balance between every little problem is a problem versus I don't see any. You get the balance of significant. And for you, treat a lot of problems as significant so that you don't under-evaluate your passage. Write them up. And then please include for me a bibliography of the sources that you used, commentaries, Bible dictionaries, periodicals, monographs of your research. Okay? So if I only see one or two commentaries, I don't want a padded bibliography. Don't pad. Be honest. But I do want to see who you or what you consulted. So that's the write-up. That is the write-up of what we want to see. And how you write it up in the putting it all together, how you write up your paper section. Follow my handout. Grasmick has them do other things. I've eliminated some things, added other things. So my handout will take precedence on how I want you to write this up. So consult my additional notes for how to write this up. I wanted to make sure before we finish this semester that that is clear, because you now should be into the grammatical observation paper. Of course, some of you have yet to do the background paper. Some of you have yet to do the lexical. You say to me, preacher, with every head bowed and every eye closed, no one looking around, I'm guilty. Can I see some hands? So I wanted to make sure it was clear, because you should be in that stage of doing that now. How many have handed me both papers? Raise your hand. How many have handed me one paper? How many have handed me two papers? Both papers. All right. Where are you at? Where are you? You working on it? Remember now, you're under the new covenant, not the old. So if you're working on Hebrew or something like that, it's the new covenant. All right, let's go back to Grasmick now. And we'll start where we left off the last time on page 171. Again, this is the details of which we've covered in big picture for this morning's lecture. You need to observe and solve exegetical problems. Page 171. Grasmick notes on the top of page 171, in a real sense, exegesis is the process of making repeated observations upon the same text in order to determine the author's meaning. Now listen to me. You're not giving me what you want it to mean. You are giving me what the author intended it to mean, plain, normal. Remember, grammatico-historical. We are not historical critics that want to make it say whatever pleases us. We want to make it say what it actually does says in the plain, normal sense of that. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, don't seek another sense. And you determine it in context. How do you know it's literal versus figurative? You look at the context. Remember, once again, roses are red. It's true, isn't it? Although they can be other colors, they are red. Violets are blue, right? So far I would say roses are red, violets are blue is a literal statement in poetic form, yes? Sugar is sweet, yes? Sugar is sweet? And then it says, and so are you. Well, immediately in that context, though it is poetry, we see that the first 3 lines of that simple little rhyme are literally true. But then the comparison is made, and so are you. The comparison comes from sugar being sweet. Now, there are medical cases in which people can be diabetic, and that literally can sweeten a person. Isn't that right, Doc?
They call it diabetes mellitus, which means sweet. Mel is.
And actually, there's a taste to that person of sweetness, isn't there?
Yes, actually, the urine will taste sweet.
There you go. Well, you're not saying they're diabetic here in that little poem. You're not diabetes mellitus? Say it again.
Mellitus.
Mellitus? I'm getting a medical education from the doc. I'll miss him.
Just so you know, there's also different types of diabetes which are not called mellitus.
Yes.
So that's why that particular form is called the sweet diabetes.
Because it actually can be physically detected by taste. That is it. The very high glucose levels that will do that.
Yes, very high. There's actually this is a classic story. Speaking of observation, there's a classic story told in medical schools all across the country of I think it was a case either back in colonial America or around that time or in Britain, where a medical school professor took a patient's urine, a diabetic patient's urine, and he said, if you guys taste this urine, it will taste sweet. And he dips his finger in it and puts it to his mouth, and he passes it around the room, and everyone's like, did he just taste that guy's urine? And the professor was giving them a lesson on observation because he had dipped his middle finger in the urine and tasted it with his index finger.
Ah.
But all the students were tasting it. So he said, if you had been good physicians, you would have observed that I did not use the same finger.
And the doctor brings up a good point. What makes a good physician? He observes. What makes a good preacher? What makes a good theologian? They observe. You observe your text. It's a very, very apropos that you're sitting there observing, and you allow Scripture to stand in judgment on your theology. So anyway, here, be as thorough as possible. Page 171. But remember, you always know that you're limited in this by your length of the paper, so don't hand me 300 pages. It's possible. So here's some good principles that he gives, and I like this on page 171. Good exegesis has to be thorough but selective. Good luck with that. But that's what it has to be. That means, number one, meditate on that passage. Page 171, meditate on that passage. Gentlemen, that's why I admire guys that on Saturday after attending, it's interesting that I've had people, Saturday night, I don't know about you all, but Saturday night is a very difficult night to be doing things as a preacher. You've got to get things ready for Sunday, but you can't neglect your people. And I've noticed very interestingly that they expect the pastor to be someplace on Saturday. But sometimes the same people that expect you to be there, if they're doing a Sunday school lesson or they're going to do something in the service on Sunday, they say, I can't be there on Saturday. I have to prepare for it. I had that happen recently where someone who I asked to do a Passover Seder, I said, come on over Saturday night. We'll have you for dinner. No, I have to study. You asked me to do the Seder tomorrow. But when it was my turn, they invited themselves over, and it was like, well, you don't have to worry about it, just, and so it's hard on Sunday or Saturday, but you have to meditate. So find your times other than, you have to me, that's why I like to preach a book. You can't always. Sometimes you have a series you want to do on some theology. But that's why I like to preach a book, and then you can do it long range, be thinking about that passage. You're meditating on it. If possible, it is good to space out 1/2 to 1 hour meditations, periods of meditation over the days before your sermon. I don't know about you, but when I jog, I've jogged for how many years now? 30 years now. Stress of grad school. When I was in my THM, I started jogging. When I first started jogging, I would go 10 feet and drop over. No cardiovascular conditioning whatsoever, man. And then finally, I got up to 8 miles when I was young. 8 miles of running every other night. Now I'm down, and I'm having a hard time doing the 5. Is there a medical reason why as a guy gets older, he can't do the 8 miles anymore?
You can probably jog longer than I can.
Really? Well, my physician told me he can't jog, that he just doesn't have the knees for it. That made me feel okay. But my point is, when you first start doing this, it's just like learning how to jog long distance. It takes cardiovascular training, figuratively speaking, to do this. So you're meditating on that passage. During the week, when you're running, I often get thoughts that come to me when I'm running. Of course, I have a little Apple iPod thing that I will download podcasts, not necessarily preacher podcasts. Some of you may like to listen to preachers. I'm in the business, so it gets harder for me to listen to some preachers. But while I'm running, I'll think of things on that passage. Or when I'm at a function, I will think of something, and my little iPhone, now I can write on a notepad. I've done that before. And you're meditating. Or if you are wealthy enough to afford an iPad, Brian, is that a 1 or a 2? 3. You have a 3? You must be in a healing ministry, man. What is that? You have an iPad 3? I used to be a Mac guy until they made me go to the dark side of the force here. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? What cover is, do you have no?
I have a stylus.
Stylus. Now, where'd you get this? What does the stylus do? You do this?
Yeah,
What?
It's
What?
just like using your finger.
Why do you need a stylus if you can use your finger?
Right.
But you can write?
Yeah.
I'm having a drug interaction here. What is this?
That's the camera.
Really? So that's the camera. And so when you go to this, where do you put the stylus? Do you fold it in somewhere?
I just keep it in the pocket.
How much are these?
It's like $18.
$18? Do you believe Jesus said, blessed are those who give and do not ask? Do you believe that Jesus said that? Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Say that with me this morning. Do you believe that this morning? Thank you. I don't keep your... No, I didn't. That's neat. So you have Notepad or something like that, right? See, yeah, that looks good. What does that do? Where'd you get that? What is that?
This is your,
Yeah, but what did you just press on?
it's a program.
What's that called?
Notability.
Notability. Why did you use Notability?
Because it allows me to write on your PDFs.
The pages won't?
No, I don't think so. I don't.
How much
that's
was
expensive.
Notability?
99 cents.
99 cents.
Or 199 cents.
Notability. And how did you get this onto your iPad?
Just applications.
Send it to yourself through an email? How did you get it on your,
I
yeah,
just downloaded from Jewel.
onto there? How did you get it on there?
I just downloaded it on Safari and then it says open Notability.
And you didn't use Pages, you used Notability.
Yeah.
I'm learning, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Notability. Would you send me an email? And tell me I use Notability? No, do that right now. Would you mind? Forget my lecture. Give me that Notability, because I'll forget. Send me that right now, Brian. You're helping me. I learn more from my students. I remember when my grandparents, to show you how old I am, when I was a kid, they came out with calculators that were, calculators, and I loved electronic gadgets, but my grandparents could not figure out how to use a calculator. They were from the old country. And I thought to myself, I never want to get to a place where I can't figure out electronic stuff. So that's why I want to know Notability, huh? And so you sent yourself an email. You sent that you opened that up through Safari, and then you use that to open it with it.
If it loads as a PDF, you could just hit it and then it'll say open in Notability and it'll just open it and save it there. And then I could write on your PDF or like type on it.
Notability. Bless you, my son. Send me that email. Thank you. And if you have any other tips for the iPad that you think are good, besides Pages and Keynote, which I know about, email Maximus and say, this is a program on an iPad that you want to have. If you know of anything else, I'd appreciate that, because I can use this. My students know more about these electronic things. I never want to come to a time when I don't know. Thank you for that. Well, my point is, you use these devices. I wonder why. Did iPad 3 put Siri on it? Wonder why they didn't do it. Do you now think that you can use that without a computer now? You don't use a computer much?
I use it more than my computer.
Really?
Except for papers and stuff.
You like it?
Yeah.
Would you recommend everybody get something like that?
It's kind of expensive.
Really?
Yeah, it took me a while to save up for it. But, you don't need anything too crazy. This is like the lowest one.
So you could actually preach with an iPad, couldn't you?
David Platt actually preached from his iPad.
Let me ask you this. Is there a Greek program that you could put on your iPad that gives you the New American Standard and the Greek text? Something like that?
I have Logos on here.
Logos is on there.
Yeah.
Full Logos?
So when I'm doing my paper, I have it open. Yeah.
Full Logos? How would you put full?
The application's free, and then you just have to have a Logos account.
Okay, but how would you get all of that was put? A full Logos ability is on your iPad?
Yeah, it's just different. It's different. It's not as easy to use as like the computer, but you can still do everything.
So if you had Accordance, could you get Accordance on there?
Oh, definitely.
Yep. There's a free Accordance application. You just sign in with your account and it lets you download all of the things that you have.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I'm always doing that to you. Could you give me an email telling me about that just briefly?
Sure.
Thank you. Why am I doing this to the DVD? Because when the DVD goes out, there's guys that'll need to know that'll have these kind of things. The iPad, you could preach with your iPad.
Do you have to be online to pick up Logos?
No.
To download it, you do, but I don't think to use it normally.
So Michael, if you had an Accordance account, what would you do? Log on to your Accordance account?
have the application, the first time you open it, it asks for your account information.
Yeah?
So you sign in, and it'll ask you, it'll like bring up a list of all of the things that you bought, and it'll ask which ones you want to download. So I just downloaded all of them.
But when I saw that, it had a price on it. Are they going to charge me again?
No, not if you've already purchased what you want on your iPad.
What do you mean, you have to repurchase it again for your iPad?
No, if you've already purchased like your Greek New Testament and your NASB, you can download them for free to your iPad.
You have to sign on though, you have to it has to register your iPad to you, so that it knows when you're online. And then when you're online, it'll have all your resources, and then you have to select each one, download.
Well, I saw a list, but then it had a price also. $230, $50.
Well, are you signed on, did you sign, you may be on Logos, you might have downloaded.
No,
the system.
Accordance.
Okay, sorry.
Well, go ahead, tell me about Logos.
Well, for Logos, you have to download Logos, the program, and then you sign into it under David Farnell. And then
Who?
Dr.
Go ahead.
Maximus.
Thank you.
Under Maximus. And then it, when you're connected to the web or whatever, it lets you access all of it. And then you can pick which one of those you want to permanently store on your iPad by hitting download.
Okay. Well, I do that so that people that see all the resources we have available to us now.
But the Greek New Testament USB is not available on the iPad form of Logos.
Why?
Because they have not been able to.
I have the Greek.
Do you have the USB or do you have the SSD or whatever?
No, I can upload the
USB.
Brian, could you send me a link of what you're doing there? Or how you are using the Greek? Do you have Logos? So you use the Logos Greek for yours. Okay.
And you're sure it's the UPS,
Yeah.
not SPL? Because I actually called them. I said I can't get my UPS, and they said, but I have like an Android, which is kind of similar. They said we haven't converted it home yet.
No, I need to know these things so that someday, if I become wealthy like Brian and can afford an iPad, then I'll know these things, you know? All right, meditate on the passage. Place yourself in the author's shoes or of the first century readers. Visualize their situation. Take the knowledge you've learned and try to visualize Paul's circumstances, the reader's circumstances. And then, after that, ask interpretive questions. Look at the bottom of page 171. Once again, I remind you of these interpretive questions that we have discussed. Repetition is what? Key to learning is what? That's why I do this. What does this mean? Why does he say this here? Now, you can't always answer why. Sometimes you can't. But you ask it. What does this imply? Who or what is involved here? How or when is this accomplished? Where is this accomplished? These are the questions that you are constantly asking in your mind. And sometimes, guys, that doesn't mean that you're going to have an answer for it. But ask it, and this is like mining in a gold mine. There may be days in which you just strike rock. But there will be a day when you may hit a rich vein, but you just got to keep doing it. And that's what you do.